Sure. Dan Bernal. George Blumenthal. George, you're on mute.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Linda Boxer, Elena Flowers.
Present, and I'm just finishing up lunch and I'll have my video on in a moment.
Thank you. Judy Gasson.
Yes.
Steve Julesgaard.
Here.
Jim Kovach.
Here.
Linda Malkus.
Here.
Adriana Padilla.
Here.
Art, Jonathan Thomas.
Here.
Art Torres.
Here.
Christina Vori.
Here.
Thank you. And we have quorum.
And I think Linda Boxer.
I'm here too.
Oh, thanks, Linda.
Hi.
Yeah, we definitely have quorum.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you again all for joining. Today, we're going to officially begin the process of searching for a new chair and vice chair of the ICOC, as JT and Art will be termed out in December. So we're not going to talk about the qualifications of the position, the percent effort, the responsibilities, or any of those things today. We're really going to limit our discussion to talking about the process and the timeline so that we can all agree on what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So it turns out that the board has the authority and the responsibility to elect the chair and the vice chair from the nominees that are coming to us from the constitutional officers. And the constitutional officers are the governor, the lieutenant governor, the treasurer, and the controller. And so once the board has had the opportunity to consider the roles and responsibilities for the positions of chair and vice chair, including percent effort, compensation, and so on, it may request that the constitutional officers nominate candidates to the board for consideration. Once the constitutional officers have nominated candidates for chair and vice chair, the governance subcommittee and the board will have the opportunity to evaluate the nominees. And by the way, thank you, James Harrison, for laying this all out for us in such a nice memo. I appreciate that. And I'm sure we've all reviewed it. In order to guide the process for the selection of the chair and the vice chair, the governance subcommittee and the board must do the following things. We have to determine the scope of roles and responsibilities for the chair and for the vice chair, the percent effort that will be required to undertake those duties, and the compensation. So are there any questions about this part of the process before we go into the timeline, or comments?
Yes, when do we anticipate the survey to be completed?
We're going to start the survey after this meeting,
Okay.
the survey of the board. And that's how we're going to collect information about the scope of roles and responsibilities, the percent effort, and those types of things.
No, I'm sorry, my question was related to the salary levels.
I'm sorry, Art, could you say that again?
Yeah, my question was related to when will the salary levels or a chart that we've requested be ready?
You mean from the salary survey, Art?
Yes.
Kevin?
We're still in the process of working with our external consultants. We are hopeful that by the end of March, we'll have that survey complete and the final report prepared.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the process before we go into the timeline? Okay, then. Maria has prepared slides for us to walk through the timeline. So Maria, if you could share your screen.
Yes, Marianne's going to share that.
Oh, Marianne, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, it is now March, and we are going to conduct a survey of the board members to gather their input for the criteria for selection of the chair and the vice chair and the scope and percent effort of the positions. We, the governance committee, will collect those data and review them over the April-May timeframe, and will prepare recommendations to the board regarding the criteria for the candidates, the scope of the positions, and the percent efforts that are required. In July, the board will consider the recommendation of the Governance Subcommittee and make a determination with regard to the selection criteria, the scope of the positions, and the percent effort required. And James, it's my understanding that such a survey was done the last time, and so we can use information on that survey to determine what questions we want to ask the board.
That's correct.
Okay. If there's no questions about this timeline, then there's one more slide. Okay. In August, we will request that the constitutional officers nominate candidates for the chair and the vice chair no later than September 1st. Based upon the selection criteria, the scope, the percent effort, and so on, as has been determined by the board through the survey and our governance subcommittee. The governance subcommittee will request that they provide background information regarding the nominees, which would include a brief personal statement about why the person believes that they would be qualified and why they are seeking this position. The material will be provided to the board and made available, of course, to the public. In October and November, we will have the opportunity, the nominees will have come in September, and in October and November, we'll have the opportunity to vet the nominees, to request additional information as necessary, and to conduct interviews with the candidates that have been brought forth from the constitutional officers. And then that brings us into December, where the board will consider the nominees, including public presentations by the candidates, in addition to closed session interviews, and then a public vote will be held at that time to vote on the new chair and the vice chair for the ICOC. Assuming that we are successful with this process, we will elect a new chair and a vice chair, and those individuals will take their oath at the first meeting in January, permitting an orderly transition of power from JT and Art. So that's the timeline that we are proposing to the governance subcommittee at this point. And does anyone have any questions or concerns or issues that they'd like to discuss? Yes, Steve.
I think George was ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry, George.
No
Your background,
problem.
I didn't see your hand. Yeah, go ahead,
No
George.
problem. I'm concerned that it's a very tight timeline. If we're making these decisions in December, expecting someone to start January 1st, the caliber of people we will be looking for aren't necessarily people who will be able to immediately drop what they're doing. And so I'm concerned that I'm wondering, is there a way of speeding up this timeline to some extent? And alternatively, I wonder what the plan would be in place should we choose someone who is not able to begin at on January 1st. What happens in that situation?
My question is similar to George's, and it has more to do with the transition. So transitions generally take time. I think, George, this is part of what you were saying. And it's nice to have a new chair running side by side with the old chair for a period of time. So much as in a relay race, you have a smooth handoff of the baton. And which suggests then that either we prolong the period and the run-in for the new chair and sometime through the first part of next year, or we do as George suggests and speed up the timeline so that we have an election well before December, so that the new person can get up to speed, so to speak, and there's a smooth and orderly transition.
Thank you both. James, do you have any comment on the question that Steve just asked about if we don't have a person that's ready to take office in January?
James just joined. He dropped off for a second, so I just want to make sure he knows the full context of what the question was. James, did you hear all of it, or?
Yeah, fortunately, okay. I joined just in time for Judy to restate the question.
Okay, great.
So I appreciate that. So under the law, the chair and vice chair hold over, meaning they continue to serve until their replacements qualify. And that means they're nominated, elected, and take the oath of office. So if there were a delay in any stage of that process, the chair and the vice chair would continue to serve so long as they're willing to do so.
Thank you, James. So in looking at this timeline, we will have the nominees. I think each of the constitutional officers will nominate one person. Is that correct, James?
That's right.
So on September 1st, in this document, we would have the five nominees. So it seems conceivable to me that rather than vetting them in October and November, we could start that process in early September. And given that there are only five nominees, it seems like we might be able to accomplish it well before December. Do people have thoughts about that?
Steve has his hand raised.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat what I said, Judy. I think at the very least, I would like to see a new chair and vice chair elected and serving starting in November. So that is, when I say that, I mean, they're able to attend meetings and converse with the chair and the vice chair about their roles and responsibilities in a handoff situation. Instead, this is a little different than becoming president of the United States. In most cases where there's a chair transition, at least those that I've been involved in, unless there's extraordinary circumstances, there is a transitionary period, usually of a couple months, to make sure that the new chair understands how things operate. It might be a little bit different if you pick somebody from this board to be the new chair. They might have that experience, but I'm assuming there's every bit of chance of there being somebody brand new and not on this board of becoming the new chair, and they'll require a little hand-holding at the beginning.
So I wasn't, when Randy took over, can someone remind us what that process looked like?
Well, Randy was the CEO, so.
I'm sorry, I don't mean Randy. I mean JT.
So one thing, Judy, I might, for whatever this is worth, in the process that led up to the election where I was selected to be chair, I actually went to 3 or 4 of the preceding board meetings just to get sort of a handle on things, so that at such time as I was elected, I was able to hit the ground running, if you will. So I think that the idea of having a new chair have an opportunity to attend a meeting or 2 or 3 or whatever is not a bad idea, because there are things everybody has to get up to speed on, particularly if it's somebody who is not from the current board. If it's somebody who is a member of the current board, then it's an entirely different matter. But I just for everybody's sake wanted to let you know that that's how I handled it.
Well, I can just relate to this conversation because being a member of the Senate, we needed to advise a consent on all gubernatorial appointments for the most part. And sometimes the governor was very late in appointing a replacement. And so it was not uncommon to have holdovers on for in some cases, as long as a year before a governor would have appointed a replacement. So I think given the schedules and making sure that everything is not all that compacted, it's not unreasonable, even 30 days holdover, if JT and I are willing to do that, to take that into consideration and make sure that there is a transition that's not rushed, but clearly appropriate. When I was elected vice chair, the compromise, because Arnold Schwarzenegger did not want me to be the vice chair of the organization, there was a compromise made that to create 2 vice chairs, a statutory vice chair and a regular vice chair. And so Dwayne and I headed off to a very shaky start, but in the end, we became very close friends and collaborators on so many bipartisan initiatives in the legislature and clearly outside the legislature. But to take the time to do that was very important for me to be acclimated in working with Dwayne before I took over or was sworn in.
So for what I'm hearing is that it would be fair to have however many nominees we end up with on September 1st, attend the subsequent board meetings through the end of the year so that they would know what business the board was conducting, as JT just pointed out he did. It also seems, according to what Art has said and what James has said, that the current chair and vice chair, if they're willing to continue to serve, could provide that transition as we go into the new year as well.
Absolutely.
Other thoughts from members of the Governance Committee? Is there a sentiment that we try to move this time? And I don't want to compress the timeline. We want to do a really good job. This is a really, really important decision for the board to make going forward in terms of the leadership starting next year. However, if we have 3, 4, or 5 candidates September 1st, we'll take however much time we need to take. However, if we were finished with the vetting process in September and October, it might be possible for us to make a recommendation in November. Is that something that people are interested in attempting? Yes, Steve? Okay. Is there any reason that we have to stick to this particular timeline, James?
No, there's not.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the process will be informing the constitutional officers that we would like to have their nominations by September 1st, and hopefully that can happen. We will then set about however long it takes us to do a complete vetting process to the satisfaction of this committee and to the satisfaction of the full board. If we're able to move up the process and come up with a nominee earlier than the December meeting, we will definitely do that. And then also, I don't know whether it would be appropriate for us to encourage the nominees to attend the board meetings, but it would certainly be helpful if they were to do so, and if they were clearly not members of the board already, if they were outside nominees.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, another wrinkle, and that is that the governor especially, and somewhat to some extent the lieutenant governor, are just swamped before September 15th, because it's usually the end of session or there's a recess in between sessions. And I wonder if we're being too optimistic that they could come up with nominees, especially the trouble we've had in terms of getting nominees, the vetting process, the governor's schedule, the governor's obviously attention that needed to be addressed to so many other matters, not the least of which was a pandemic, that I just want to make sure that we're not viewed as rushing, but at the same time that people, when viewing this process, will see that we've taken deliberate time, because this is a 12-year tenure that we're seeking to replace. And I think we want to make sure that we do dot every I, cross every T as we proceed. And I'm not saying we're not willing to do that or unwilling to do that. I'm just saying we need to be sensitive to the other schedules that are involved with people who are being asked to nominate.
Thank you, Art. Steve?
Yeah, I want to concur with what Art said. I would actually move up the ask of the constitutional officers to no later than June 1st. That process is independent of anything else we're doing. This is their process to come up with names of people. And I can recall when this happened back the last time around, getting a couple of different phone calls from a couple of different constitutional officers as they were shopping around for people to nominate. So, you know, they don't have anybody necessarily right off the top of their head that they've already thought about, and they have to go through a process to come up with if they're going to nominate somebody to do that. So I completely agree with Art. I think giving them a month and a half is just far too short a timeline to get done what we needed to do. I would much prefer to have them start around June 1st and work through the summer.
Other thoughts on this?
What does James think?
I think that seems reasonable, Steve, and obviously to the extent that the Governance Subcommittee and the board can afford the constitutional officers more time, that would be ideal. I defer to Maria about the board schedule, since the sort of first step in this process. Well, theoretically, you could notify the constitutional officers at any point in time that the current chair and vice chair's terms are coming to an end, and that the board requests that they consider or begin to consider making nominations, with more information to come from the board with respect to the scope of the role, percent effort required, and compensation. But ultimately, the board will have to make the final determination on those questions before that specific information can be provided to the constitutional officer. So it depends in part on the timing of the board's meeting schedule.
We would need to add probably a board meeting in early June after our late May board meeting. I'm not sure we could get everything to the May board meeting. It's a lot but we could try and put a June meeting just in case.
Or Maria, rather move the late May meeting to June.
Okay, easier said than done with 35 board members, but we can try.
Well, just an
I'd almost keep the May just to get all our board business done there, and then see what we can add in June. But I'm willing to try anything. You know that.
Okay, so what we're talking about now is to try to compress the front end, which involves the identification of the roles, responsibilities, the qualifications, the percent effort, so that we can get that information to the constitutional officers. But we can at any time inform them that we will be looking for nominations from them, and we will be providing them information on those qualifications. That would then give them more time to come up with nominees. And then on the back end, we're trying to be very, very, very efficient, but at the same time, very careful that we go through a very rigorous vetting process with those nominees. If we're able to come up with a vote in November, and if the current chair and vice chair are willing to remain on after the end of December, then there should be a period there for an orderly transition of a very complicated organization if the new chair and or vice chair are not current members of the board. Other thoughts from the members of the committee? Would the committee like us to revise the timeline or keep the timeline as it is, but articulate to the board that we will try to move more efficiently through this process to make sure that we have the best candidates, the best opportunity to vet them, and the best opportunity to vote? George?
Well, my inclination in answer to your question would be to say it's better to move the timeline up. If you set a hard goal, you have a chance of reaching it. If you don't actually make it an official goal, it seems to me there's very little chance that we would make the quicker timeline. So I'm in favor of all of the methods that you mentioned to try to speed this along.
Thank you, George. Steve?
I second that motion.
Thank you, Steve. Adriana?
Yes, I also agree that I think the nomination needs to happen earlier, and I like the June timeline for that.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? So if James, Christina, Maria, and I come up with a slightly faster timeline and circulate it to the members of the committee before the board meeting next week, would that work for the members of the committee? I think I see a few heads nodding. You want to put the slide down, Maria, so I can see if people are nodding or not? Thanks. Okay, are we nodding? I see nodding. Okay, Linda's nodding. Okay, so the 4, 5, 6 of us will do that, and we will circulate it. And if everybody is good, then we will present this whole sort of process to the board at the meeting. I think it's next Thursday. I'm sorry, Art, were you going to say something?
No, I just want to
okay.
say,
Okay. Okay, Maria, is there any other business for us to discuss today?
There is not.
And
Judy, did you want to take a vote with the caveat that the timeline would be changed to reflect the members' input so that we could then send it or suggest it to the board next week?
yes, I think we had a motion from George and Steve.
Sounds good.
Okay, Maria, did you want to call the roll, please?
Can we ask for public comment first, just in case someone from the public is on?
Of course.
I don't think anyone is, but just in case.
Yes. Is there any comment from the public before we take the roll?
Just one, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but just one caveat. Don't anticipate that all the constitutional officers will meet a June deadline. That's all.
We can try. That's,
Yeah,
we can try.
right.
It doesn't sound like September is any better than June, so.
Maybe we should tell them May.
Well, I was even thinking after September 15th would probably be a better time because you're also dealing with a budget in June as well. So I hate to put those wrinkles in, but that's the reality of what these constitutional officers are dealing with.
And can I just add, Judy, one additional wrinkle to what Art said? If we're looking to get some nominees in place by June, with respect to any nominees that may not be members of the board, that's a pretty accelerated timeline for the constitutionals to have come up with some names and picked, et cetera. Art, what do you think about that?
Yes, and number two, all of these constitutional officers are up for re-election in June 22. And
wow.
Another wrinkle.
This is getting wrinklier and wrinklier.
Sorry, Judy, that didn't help much, those last couple of comments.
And thank you for that, JT. I think that one thing that this board can do is to reach out to each of our networks and to solicit people who would be interested in being nominated for the chair and the vice chair of the ICOC, and provide that information if it's at all helpful to the constitutional officers. JT, how did you come to be a candidate?
I was nominated by 3 of the 4.
Well, that made it a little easier, didn't it?
Well, it resulted in had a very highly qualified other candidate as well. So the nominees went to the board, and at the June board meeting, 2011, I believe it was, maybe it was the May board meeting, I forget. Anyway, we had public presentations by myself and my opponent, and then a closed session, and then a public session vote after that. So, but with respect to, was a little bit different. I sort of talked to the constitutional officers myself. It wasn't a matter of the board submitting my name or my opponent's name to the constitutionals. This is a little bit different process than we did for that one.
They also relied on your relationship with Governor Brown, which was very extensive, and I think that helped a lot. And it was not an easy race. I mean, it was pretty elevated and pretty divided, where some board members wouldn't even return Jerry's calls because they knew what he was calling, right? And there was just it was very unpleasant. And thank God we prevailed. I still have the tension that was on in that room when the vote was being counted, because it was interesting. But thank God JT prevailed.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you. Thank you both. And boy, we really got something to look forward to here.
Well, maybe not as bad as it was.
Let's see. So there was no public comment. Okay. All right. So then we'll go ahead and call the roll, Maria.
Dan Bernal, George Blumenthal,
Yes.
Linda Boxer,
Yes.
Elena Flowers,
Yes.
Judy Gasson,
Yes.
Steve Julesgard,
Yes.
Jim Kovach,
Yes.
Linda Malkus,
Yes.
Adriana Padilla,
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas,
Yes.
Art Torres,
Aye.
Christina Vori.
Yes.
Great, the motion carries.
Okay, we will get our heads together and come up with an accelerated timeline and present it to the board next Thursday.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Judy and Kevin and Maria.
Any other comments or questions?
I just want to thank you, Judy. If we can do this whole process as efficiently as you ran this meeting, we'll be fine.
I second that.
Sure.
Thank you for that. You're just trying to make me feel better after what Art said about the tension.
You're up for it, Judy.
You're tough, girl.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for being
Bye.